In more recent videos, I've discussed the idea of function axes in detail. In this video, I would like to propose another way to categorize the types, similar to David Keirsey, but by using the function axes. For example, types possessing both an FETI and SENI axis would form one category. Those with both a TEFI and NESI axis would form another, and so on. The four categories that arise from this have some interesting characteristics. For one, they essentially join what socionics terms the dual relationships. Though there isn't a perfect correlation between socionics and the Myers-Briggs type indicator, for our purposes I think it's accurate to say that the INFJ's dual is the ESTP, the ENFJ's dual is the ISTP, and so on. These four types all share the same function axes and are therefore in the same category together, which would imply they might have a more natural time understanding each other. Socionics certainly seems to think so. In any case, the second interesting characteristic is that each category has a representative of each of the four basic functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, albeit in varying attitudes. For instance, the INFJ has dominant introverted intuition, the ESTP has dominant extroverted sensation, the ENFJ has dominant extroverted feeling, and the ISTP has dominant introverted thinking. In this video, I'd like to take a glance at the characteristics that seem to be evident in these four categories. In doing so, I will try to show essential similarities between the types that are generally thought incompatible, which may help break down or at least alter some of the stereotypes about them. The first category I will discuss combines FETI and SENI, giving us the INFJ, ENFJ, ESTP, and ISTP. The FETI axis brings a harmonizing attitude, one that tries to align with an outside standard of some kind. The SENI axis brings a magnifying or intensive attitude, which directly experiences objects but associatively experiences their impressions of objects. I personally enjoy Yeghor's comment for part 3 of How to Type Someone, where he compared the SENI axis to a black hole that sucks objects into itself and crushes them together into a singularity. I like the analogy because it illustrates both the unifying and intensive nature of introverted intuition. So, the INFJ, ENFJ, ESTP, and ISTP all demonstrate a harmonizing attitude and an intensive unifying attitude. The word that I think can best represent these two attitudes simultaneously, though it's a working name and I may change it later, but right now it's saint. By that I mean someone who is intensive, direct, and focused, dedicated or committed to certain points of view, and therefore tending to appear dogmatic at times, as well as thinking in terms of a greater good or separate standard that they are trying to subject themselves to. I'm sure the word saint is probably not how most people would describe the ESTP or the ISTP. I myself can't imagine General Patton in a monk's garb with a halo, but I'm not talking about robes or rings of light, but the stereotypical attitude of alignment and dogma that I associate with saints. And I think this does apply to the ESTP and ISTP. The ISTP I describe as mastering, because they analyze reality, figure out its logical structure, and then try to copy or align themselves with that structure. Like your cinematic Zen monk or acrobat, or perchance a type of saint. The ESTP too, though they aren't known for religious restraint as we think of it, still think in terms of living according to an outside standard, which is demonstrated in their personal philosophies and their concern with communicating properly with others. I think the idea of an ESTP, quote, saint would be Epicurus, who secluded himself in a garden with his friends and imposed upon himself rules and laws of a kind of practical hedonism. In other words, rules by which one could have a more satisfying experience of reality. I think this is true of ESTPs in general. Meanwhile, the ENFJ and INFJ are somewhat easier to imagine as saints. The ENFJ is the most outspoken saint, the preacher or evangelist who is concerned with communicating a vision or persuading others to unite for a greater good or cause. The INFJ is the less outspoken and more contemplative saint, the monk who spends a great deal of time thinking or teaching in intimate settings, developing a holistic, idealistic theory of what humanity must do to be happy. So, as a sort of summary of all that, we see in the courtyard of our monastery the ISTP practicing swordsmanship and writing down techniques and strategies. In the inner gardens, we see the ESTP and their followers making a simple and pleasurable life for themselves. Outside the monastery, before its doors, the ENFJ is speaking to a large gathering of people to hear persuasions to the monastery's ultimate cause. And within the hallways of the monastery is the INFJ, teaching classes and counseling individuals, but most often taking long, silent, and solitary walks to ponder ideas before presenting them. The second category combines TE-FI with SE-NI, giving us the INTJ, ENTJ, ESFP, and ISFP. The TE-FI axis brings an individuating attitude, one that tries to affirm a personal, subjective standard. And as I've said before, the SE-NI axis brings an intensive attitude, which Yeghor has described as a black hole, synthesizing many disparate things into a singularity, which leads to a sense of dogmatism at times or a commitment to a perspective. So, the INTJ, ENTJ, ESFP, and ISFP all demonstrate these individuating and intensive attitudes. Therefore, rather than call them saints, who would try to align with an outside standard, these types I call, though I'm sure it is going to get some laughter or criticism at first, quote, royalty. Now, my reasoning for this is not that they necessarily want to be royalty. As I've established with the ISFP, that's far from the case. But because they have the sure perspective or dogma of the saints, but with an independent, individuating sense of judgment, they are not wont to be ruled by others, but feel a strong sense of going their own way as though they had some blue blood in them, as well as a desire to fill some definite vision that they have synthesized. In the case of the ESFP, who I've described as saying yes to life, we might imagine a hearty, energetic, lovable royal figure, full of spirit and a love of life, but also with a definite sense of independence, of free spirit, that seems to remind us of their blue blood and nobility. It is similar for the ISFP, though usually milder. They present an aura or style in how they walk and talk, giving the impression of natural otherworldliness or separateness that could be described as, quote, blue blood in their veins. In both cases, these types also demonstrate a directness and commitment of perspective, albeit it is more focused on the here and now, but which adds to the sense of a royal figure in their self-assurance. Now, in returning to the NTJ types and referring to them as royalty, I don't want to conjure the image of a malevolent tyrant or haughty prince or whatever. My reasoning for calling them royalty is essentially the same as with the ESFP and ISFP. Their TE-FI axis grants them that sense of individualism, of being different and wanting to walk their own way, of difficulty conforming to others' standards, which might remind us of inherent nobility of some kind. Meanwhile, the SE-NI axis also grants a commitment of perspective, which in turn grants self-assurance in that perspective, something characteristic of a classic royal figure. Stereotypically, the INTJ might remind us of a reserved strategist, a king able to navigate the royal politics with the coldness necessary to maintain order, while the ENTJ would be more heavy-handed in their navigation, crushing opposition to their state and known for more flagrant displays of power. So, to summarize, in the royal court we have the ESFP, hearty and brave, fun-loving but driven, charming leader of Camelot, with the ISFP, who walks mildly through the court like an elven dignitary, praised for their artistic talent and very presence. There is also the INTJ, a philosopher king, a good friend and honest and willing to follow after the SFPs and having a good time, but altogether a rather severe character and concerned with strategy and maintaining benevolent manifestations of power in the court. And then there is the ENTJ, head of the army, known for totally crushing opponents and for enjoying clear manifestations of the state's power to discourage enemies of the state, but also enjoying life with a boisterous smile and an energetic drive. The third category combines the FETI and NESI axes, includes the ENTP, INTP, ESFJ, and ISFJ types, and I personally like to call them, for now at least, the philosophers. This is because, like the saints, the philosophers judge by aligning with a standard. They are seeking an outside truth. However, unlike the saints, the philosophers demonstrate the NESI axis, so that rather than being intense, committed, and dogmatic at times, they are rather the opposite, exploratory, multifaceted, and ultimately non-committal, at least in the sense of their perspective. NE doesn't commit to any viewpoint because it wants to see more, while SI doesn't commit to a viewpoint because it is unsure of how the future will unfold and wants to be ready for anything. Once again, Yegor gave an interesting analogy for this axis too. He compared it to a wormhole rather than a black hole, because while a black hole sucks everything into one singularity or one perspective, the wormhole provides a shortcut between perspectives, going here and there, figuring things out quickly and cleverly. In any case, I use the word philosopher because of this search for truth, with the emphasis on the search, the inquiry, and the non-committal analysis. As we've seen previously, the more sensation-dominant types, in this case the SFJ types, don't seem to fit the image of a philosopher very well. They are generally thought of as nurturers of some sort. However, the image that I propose in this case is of a philosopher farmer, like Odysseus from Homer's Iliad, the wise, practical, caring, and stern, and in their mind focused on the important, real things in life, but despite appearances, exceptionally thoughtful. The ESFJ, for instance, might be a very kindly, warm-hearted philosopher, helpful and usually cheerful, but not as a result of mere tradition or unthinking faith, but of their own Socratic inquiry into the matter. They have thought about this and find their way of life more desirable in comparison to other ways of life. This all applies to the ISFJ as well, who tends to be noticeably more stubborn in their views and strong in the carrying out of their ideas and convictions. In fact, I think the idea of a philosopher-farmer, though SFJs are by no means predisposed to farming, to be a closer image than that of just a motherly nurturer. Of course, the NTP types are easier to imagine. The ENTP, in my opinion, and inspired by CelebrityTypes.com, is best represented by Socrates himself, being interested in the inquiry after truth from many angles. It is a similar story for the INTP, but the focus here is on the organization of the truth within themselves and the development of logical principles over finding them out. So, in summary, we have in the philosophical school the ESFJ greeting all the people in a friendly manner and giving timely advice to those who ask. There is also the ISFJ quietly working on discourses concerning how to live a good life and occasionally giving them publicly. And in the center is the ENTP, asking fellow philosophers difficult questions and listening carefully to their answers. And there is also the INTP, separate, rather like the ISFJ, working out their own theories of the universe and its nature. Finally, the fourth category combines TEFI with NESI, includes the INFP, ENFP, ISTJ, and ESTJ, and I like to call them the free spirits. This is because, like the quote royalty, these types have that sense of individuality, but instead of an intensity and a singular perception, they have the philosopher's exploratory perception, giving them more of a sense of travel, as it were, making them even less fettered than the royalty types and more want to be free and go their own way in one way or another. However, this definitely does not match up with stereotypes of the STJ types. These have often been perceived as anything but free-spirited, worker drones or traditionalists, duty fulfillers, and strict rule-bound killjoys. But the fact of the matter is that none of these ideas actually applies to the ISTJ or ESTJ like we think they do. These are all only surface impressions that people may get from them, a sense of severity or of thoroughness, which many people associate with being a strict rule-bound killjoy, but I don't think is any more accurate than to say ENFPs are just happy-go-lucky bundles of joy and to leave it at that. The image of the ISTJ I'd like to paint for you is of a thorough thinker. Yes, someone who, as I described in their video, is trying to build and waterproof every inch of a ship that can take them safely across a dangerous and unpredictable ocean. But there's the key. They are interested in sailing into the ocean. They just tend to take a great deal of time preparing to head out there. But that's where they're going. The ISTJ does have as an integral part of their personality that sense of free-spiritedness, of going their own way, but they are very thorough and responsible about it. We usually associate the free spirit with a carefree spirit, but at least in my definition, the ISTJ shows that this can be very far from the case. It is similar for the ESTJ, and in fact easier to see. They are characterized by a strict sense of responsibility and even severity, but they are still free-spirited. They go their own way, but they are responsible on their journey, or at least try to be. Extrovert thinking, by its very nature, is individuating, because it sees the world as cold and the individual as warm, and so it is for the ESTJ. They are not system builders, they are survivors, if you will, and in this sense, very free spirits. The NFP types are easier to imagine. The ENFP is seen as the very definition of the free spirit in their energetic exploration. The INFP too, being characteristically idiosyncratic, is by definition something of a free spirit, going their own way in their lifestyle itself. So, in summary, out on the rolling ocean we have the free spirit sailing. The ISTJ is nearest to the shore, maintaining a very sturdy boat on the waves. The ESTJ took off before him, running a tight ship and working hard to keep everything in line so that the ship runs properly and they can get to where they need to go. The ENFP has practically constructed their ship at sea, but it's working well enough, and they have roughly mapped dozens of islands along the coast. And then there is the INFP, far out at sea, adrift, alone, watching the clouds, thinking about life, and without any definite plans on returning to shore. I hope this video has been useful to you, and thank you very much for all of the support you guys have been giving me. I'll just keep on thanking you forever and ever, because this has been a great opportunity for me. So thank you. Thank you very much for watching, and I will do my best to answer any comments in the comment section. So thank you.